Bola Tinubu has directed immediate investigation to ascertain the allegation that the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Alleviation, Betta Edu, made payment of 585 million naira into a private account against Nigeria's financial laws. The Minister of Information and National Orientation, Mohammed Idris, in a statement on Sunday, said the president is determined to get to the root of the matter and unravel the truth. According to Idris, the president promised that appropriate action will be taken to ensure that any breaches and infractions are identified and decisively punished in line with the administration's commitment to public accountability and due process. The statement advised citizens to exercise patience on the matter while the investigation lasts, assuring that the findings will be communicated duly and transparently to the public.
Right, well, Arise analyst Frank Tietie joins us now from our Abuja studio to discuss the allegations of corruption in the management of the social investment scheme and the need to ensure transparency and probity in the sector. It's great to have you, Frank, and Happy New Year. I don't believe we've spoken this year. But let's get straight into it. A probe into the affairs of the ministry. We've already seen the suspension of Halima Shehu of the NSIPA. Is a probe enough? Do we need to see the minister stepping aside so that the public knows that the president is serious about this issue?
Well, thank you, and Happy New Year again. I think the president responded very quickly, timely, and expectedly when he suspended the coordinator of the Nigerian Social Investment Program Agency. Whether the same treatment should be given to the minister, it raises questions in the sense that are there clear and obvious infractions by the minister? Those are things that the president has also called for a probe. If the president didn't have many options. If he didn't call for this probe, it would have been, partial. It would have been a sort of preferential treatment for somebody against the other. But the issues are very many. The president is responding to a norm very lately. This idea of transferring funds into private accounts has been the practice in government. So if the president is going to probe that issue, he should have probed it much earlier because that has been the practice. I know for certain, as a matter of experience, I have worked in a very high-level government committee in my career as a human rights lawyer, where I represented this country at the United Nations level. And I realized that monies were paid to me for the sitting allowances I made from private accounts because at that time, given the development of the Treasury single account, it was a practice. The practice was developed. Why somehow they created this idea of a project accountant who would now receive money into their private accounts and then begin to dispose as when directed or necessary. I found it very illegal. I remember, unfortunately for that project accountant, he called me back to say, look, I overpaid you. And I said, okay, send me your account number. And I sent all the money back to him because I found it very strange that for a government service that I provided, I was being paid from a private account. So it's a norm. If the president is going to probe, then he probably may probe every ministry, department, and agency of government because that has been happening since the Treasury single account has been in practice. Probably every minister or every permanent secretary or the chief executive of an agency, the past and present administration will be caught in the middle of that kind of infraction. However, I find it very curious that the statement coming from the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs is that she carried out that approval according to due process. Very difficult it has been for them to now tell us what due process is. It would have been more helpful if they traced the presidential directive that gave them that sort of waiver or exception, because for every law there is an exception. In this case, we're talking about a financial regulation that were actually put in place by the Honorable Minister of Finance, not necessarily an express law made by the National Assembly. So certain regulations are subject to several interpretations by these public servants themselves. And so there leaves a lot of room for interpretation whether or not what the minister has done is right or wrong. But the proper thing is for the president to have called for a probe, because the bandwagon effect is that there is a statement calling for the head of the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs. But before that is done, we must look at our system, because considering from my experience and my observation and my inquiries, the practice of transferring money, government money into private accounts of government workers is normal as a matter of practice in the last administration of President Muhammadu Buhari, and to a large extent since the administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu.
Well said, Frank. Now, of course, if we expand this to the timing that this has come out, it's coming as ministries are preparing for their first performance assessment by the end of this month. Do you think we're going to see a similar situation play out in other ministries, like what we're witnessing right now happening with Betta Edu?
Yes. If the president does a serious forensic probe, I doubt if any ministry will escape this kind of what is now being described as a malfeasance. But from my experience, I think is a normal practice, which the president ought to have addressed when that fellow allegedly stole 109 billion. He was the Ahmed Idris, who was the Accountant General of the Federation, allegedly stole 109 billion. So at that time, the president should have considered how did it happen. The man should have actually been sat down before being prosecuted to actually unravel how he was able to do that. That was some measure of mastery, stealing government funds. Now, all those the president hasn't addressed all those things. Now, this is coming. We are addressing this issue now because the minister, Better Adu, was queried Shehu that she transferred a certain 44 billion without her knowledge, and they called the EFCC in. So, you know, the idea is we probably may not be dealing with this cesspool of unaccountability or the corruption, as it were, if Minister Adu did not query Halima Shehu or call the EFCC in. But I maintain that the goal of the financial regulation actually is to make government finances more transparent and see that there is greater accountability and reduction of graft and corruption in the way government operates its finances. And it's good. And unfortunately, it hasn't been reviewed for a long time, despite the fact that there was one interesting policy called Treasury Single Account, which created this idea, this norm of paying money into private accounts. The president ought to have addressed that before now. Now, when you say that this is the end time, or the time where the ministries will be having their performance, review, consider that these ministers had a retreat at the time. They learned these processes. What happened to the minister? Did she not learn anything at the ministerial retreats that the president held for the very expensive one and had all those think tanks coming to speak? And again, why is it that, because it's also interesting, because as a lawyer, I know that beyond a guilty act, there must also be a guilty mind. So it interests me a lot that probably the minister is enjoying some less disciplinary measures that was served on Shehu, because she attempted to make it a bit transparent by asking for the Accountant General of the Federation to transfer the money. But the statement I read from the Accountant General is saying that it wasn't really insinuating that it was illegal, but saying that she wasn't going to do it, but rather the ministry as a self-accounting entity should do it, because if they were to transfer the money to a private individual, he or she as the Accountant General or the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation will not be able to monitor the expenditure in terms of disbursing the money to persons who didn't have account. Though all those are insinuations, they bring the conclusion that that's their normal practice in government. So this presents a very golden opportunity for the president to take another look at the financial regulations that were issued by the Minister of Finance a long time ago, from the last checks in 2009, ought to have been reviewed, to now give a more effective, a more transparent and less rancorous and uncertain way public finance is actually dealt with.
Right. Now, I'm glad we're bringing in the Accountant General of the Federation because, of course, we know that she did not honor this payment. However, when you look at the legalities around it, this came to light through a leak of a document. However, after not honoring the payment, it was actually the duty of the AGF to report shall I call it an abnormal request. My question to you is, if we're going to follow due process in this investigation, will the AGF escape this web that is being knit by this controversy?
See, the memo is released because there are disgruntled elements. There are persons somebody was queried for transferring 44 billion to a private account. And then it's sort of a concept of the kettle calling a pot black. You say, you query me for transferring 44 billion when you also authorize the transfer of 500 plus million to a private account. And then there is an accountant general who did not query it because I maintain personally that it's a norm among them. And I've seen it, I've queried it myself. It will interest you. Since nearly 5 years of my delivery of those services to the government, I haven't been paid, probably, and even the money that I returned to the private account from which I was paid hasn't even been paid to me, probably been punished for not following the norm that they have established. They established as a tradition among themselves. That's the reason why the Accountant General of the Federation did not query it. Yes, indeed. Again, I will not rush to a conclusion until I challenge them, especially the Better Edu and her handlers, that if they maintain that the idea of payment of monies, government monies into a private account is according to due process. Let them provide. Let them be able to come into the public square and explain and give us how much it is in due compliance with whatever directive that the president has made. Interestingly, the financial regulations being the directives of a minister, a co-minister, just like Betta Adu herself, one wonders whether if she's subject to it, that's a different matter. The president will determine that, or probably if those who are planning to go to court make that an issue, and the court will determine that. But clearly, what's important here is that definitely the General of the Federation did not believe that what Betta Adu had requested was illegal. If she did, she would have said so. What she did, from what the reports I've read, is simply that you process the money yourself as a ministry and take responsibility for it. We won't do it since we are not going to be accounting for the disbursement of those monies to the ultimate recipients.
Well said, Frank. Now, of course, you mentioned the retreat earlier on that was expensive, like you said. I'm wondering if, the minister didn't really learn much from there. But if we go back to what preceded the retreat, when it came to the screening process of her and the likes, what would you like to see shift when it comes to how those who are supposed to hold public offices are both appointed or approved, whatever the case may be?
Well, in our country, we have very minimum requirements for public service, especially political public service. You don't really need to know much or display so much acumen and in terms of being able to handle public office. We've seen central bank governors that have a single bachelor arts degree in history, and probably at those times we saw very much stable monetary policies and monetary situation. So it's very fluid to determine qualification. However, there's something quite instructive here, is that when our country gives these women a chance to participate in public office, there's expected to be a shift from the fact that corruption has actually always been driven by the male folk as a matter of history. It becomes very painful that when women, whether it's Halima Shehu or Betta Adu in this time, or when it started with Patricia Ete, and then they are all being smeared with these issues of corruption, it becomes very painful for me. I wouldn't want to shift. I still believe that our Nigerian women are capable. Ugozi Okonjo-Iweala still stands as a very strong testament of integrity and capability, and wide international acceptability. Nevertheless, I look forward to a situation where these women will actually be subjected to thorough scrutiny, and if they are found wanting, the president should do the needful. However, as it is now, the bandwagon effect is simply saying crucify them. Whereas I, as a lawyer, I first of all assume the innocence of all those concerned until any form of guilt is proven. At this time, I think we should still continue to give Nigerian women, especially young women, a chance in political office and in governance generally.
Absolutely. We shouldn't just remember that they're women now because there's controversy. But Frank, just maintaining this conversation, I know we focused a lot on the transfer of money. However, there's the document that has, caused much of the furore, which is the document requesting travel to Kogi Airport. Earlier you said the transfer of money to personal accounts is something that's a norm in government practice. It's an unspoken secret, an open secret rather. Well, what about this request to fly to an airport that doesn't exist? Is this also an open secret of how things are conducted in government offices?
I'm sure those who facilitated my appointment by the president then into an interministerial committee will probably regret that I'm revealing a bit of some secrets of how government operates. I hate to speak in defense of any of these persons, but the government runs in some measure of fluidity, opacity, and which actually and these things encourage corruption. Nevertheless, somehow they have their rules. I also know that with the flexibility they operate. I recall being a member of this committee where they round things up, they make things up, and all that. So definitely there is no airport in Kogi, but somehow there is a possibility. And I speak from experience. If I didn't have that experience, I probably would be outrightly condemning the idea of voting money to go to Kogi by air when there is no airport there. But somehow there's a way to consolidate all these monies, and that's why somehow it's kind of that's where public servants get a lot of money, working in these extra ministerial and duties, because they vote in a lot of money for themselves. The reason is that they justify it when they say, okay, they have various standards they created for themselves. So, for example, this is a possibility, I'm not sure, that they can say, look, if there is a standard of go to any state by flight. However, because of the security situation, go by flight. If there is no airport, consolidate the money as if there is an airport there and go with a chartered taxi taxi or whatever and all that. So the problem is that they have not been quite direct and truthful about it. That's the problem. But somehow, the way they do their self-accounting and all that, they use a lot of cover-up to justify whatever they do. However, interestingly, this is supposed to be an internal memo. You know, I have them here. I have the privilege of being of having all of these, and I've studied them. It looks very interesting. The idea is that somebody simply is bringing this out now because somebody else is not happy. However, I maintain this is what they always do. If the president wants to do a forensic audit, probably ask Jim Obaze to also step into it, the likes of Jim Obaze, who have an eagle eye with regards to all this investigation, and the president will be sorry, realizing that these practices have been there even before President Muhammadu Buhari, and then simply being sustained. So it simply underscores the need for a total overhaul of the way government finances are operated. And if you look at the idea of the Freedom of Information Act. Yes, all of this, every ministry, department, and agency of government should be ready at all times to provide information as to the way it spends government money. So this is really no big deal. That's an internal memo and somebody is leaking it. I don't want to maintain it's been leaked simply because it was not properly requested for. However, it's supposed to be a public document, and it's supposed to be a document available to every journalist upon request. Therefore, it is important now for public servants to learn a lesson. The Nigerians are becoming more aware and that they cannot just take things for granted. Right, that you are going to Kogi with flight ticket, whereas they consolidate the amount of money. What I see here is a flight ticket, 200,000 naira, and then whereas in their own mind, or whereas in their committee meeting, they said, okay, charter a Jeep or charter a Hilux and all that, and the money is equivalent to 200,000 naira. State it the way it is so that we know that you are either profligate as a government worker or you're trying to be economic, so that we can judge the kind of standard by which our public finances are operated.
Well said, Frank. Now, as we begin to round up with you, you have said that there's a need for a total overhaul of the process of how government spends money. But I still want to go back to, the process of how those who occupy public office are screened. Of course, you mentioned that we have great examples like the likes of Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala and whatnot. If you put the gender aside, what are the metrics that you'd like to see, whether it's introduced or adjusted or removed in the process, that could actually ensure that we have the right people getting into these positions of authority that could actually make or mar us as a country?
That's a very difficult question. The reason is it's very difficult to win elections, and those who win elections are the ones who control things in our country. When you win election and you have political power, you become the appointer. So that goes to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. The idea is that political appointments are a reward mechanism in our political system. So he looks back, and who is better? Do with a national women leader or something who gathered a lot of votes from the South for the president. So the idea is that it's reward her with, I hate to use the word, juicy ministry, but that's what operates. So it's not, so political appointments are not subject to issues of competence or some measure of having some academic records. That's not about that. It's about political reward. We need to look at it again. If those of us who sit down here and begin as armchair critics and begin to say, look, we ought to appoint the guy who got something from Stanford or who has paid his dues working for PricewaterhouseCoopers or whatever. The idea is this: those guys didn't win election. So the appeal therefore goes to the president. Mr. President, remember that government is not just about party or putting the guys who are able to gather votes. There's some measure of technocracy in government. However, the technocrats in government are supposed to be civil servants, the permanent secretary, the directors, the likes of the Accountant General of the Federation. Those are the persons who should advise a political appointee like Betta Odu, who doesn't have much experience. She looks quite young. But to say, look, you can't do this. These are the things where you are limited by this, and these are what the rules say. Unfortunately, these technocrats also play along, afraid of the political appointee. The truth about it is that a permanent secretary should be the one that runs a ministry and gives and delimits the powers of a political appointee like a minister. So if you ask me about the parameters, the indices in choosing political appointees, that's very difficult because it's a matter of those who brought votes. So in our country, the general standard in our country is that, look, just have school cert and then you become president. And then if the highest office in the land requires only school cert, why are you asking me that I should insist that the person who runs the humanitarian affairs ministry should have a degree from Stanford or should have Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala's experience? That's a difficult question for me to answer.
Right, now, as we go now, Frank, very quickly, do you think Betta Edu will survive this?
It's difficult to say. I speak in two ways. I think the furore and I would say that the public outrage against her action, I think is misplaced. The reason is, I think it's an obfuscation of the issues. Whereas she issued a sort of query or a complaint to the EFCC for what she considers as a malfeasance. Then what we now see is the real issues being, overtaken by an act which he has done, which I consider as a norm in the public service. So if the president is going to be dispassionate, he will probably excuse her. That's what I think. And then give the reason, with in addition to the fact that giving himself the challenge of overhauling the entire finance operations of the public service. I think she might survive it because she hasn't shown any culpability. There is a whole lot of difference between the issue that overtook Babachi Lawal, where the grass cutter scandal, because it was obvious at that time that Babachi Lawal, ensured that government money was diverted to a certain account where he was personally going to benefit. If Benadu is able to escape the fact that she did not in any way personally benefit from any of those authorizations she made, she'll probably escape on the grounds that she is able to adduce enough evidence that this is the norm, this is the due process. However, unfortunately, the due process is being challenged now by a regulation, not necessarily a law made by the National Assembly. A regulation that is nearly obsolete. 2009 is a long time, given the fact that the Treasury Single Account Policy allowed